Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our November virtual tasting for the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club featuring RZN Wines and the owner winemaker Nate Axline. We are so excited to have him here. Before we get to our questioning of Nate and tasting through his four delectable, primarily forgotten grape wines, in fact, all forgotten grape wines, a couple of quick announcements, and I'm sure Allison will chime in with anything she's got, any new business. First and foremost, tickets for the Festival of Forgotten Grapes, the 2025 Festival of Forgotten Grapes, are on sale now. Both the VIP and the general admission tickets are available. You can go to festivalofforgottengrapes.com and pick those up. Again, the date for the festival is Saturday, March 29th. So definitely put that on your calendars. I believe we are at or very close to 30 wineries, including quite a few new wineries that we've got so far. We're expecting to pick up a lot more between now and the end of the year, now that harvest is coming to a close. Winery owners and winemakers have a little more time to concentrate on business affairs. We expect to hear from quite a few more.
We are right now almost equal with a couple extra new wineries to our returning wineries. And there's more to come, but we have enough to promote. The seminar topic for VIP tickets is coming. I think I know what it is. We just have to confirm it, but you just have to trust us. Even if we don't have it announced, the tickets are there. But we've added some more added value to the VIP tickets and to the consumer and to the general admission. The tickets are on sale early, even though we haven't finished filling everything in, because we knew that for the holidays, I know some people want to get their tickets early or maybe give them as stocking stuffers to their wine-loving friends. And we just wanted to be ready for you guys. And yes, you can just trust us that we're going to keep adding more value to the event.
Yes, but you can see the list of the wineries that are going to be joining us on the website, and also the additional perks that Allison mentioned are listed there as well. So definitely check that out. Our next virtual tasting, the last of 2024, will be on Thursday, December 19th. We're going to be featuring Omega Road Winery from Livermore, our first ever Livermore winery. That offer is going to go out the Tuesday of Thanksgiving, so keep an eye out for that. It's a nice little Black Friday or Small Business Saturday purchase you can make to help support us and get you guys some great wine.
And I just have to let you know, because I went to Livermore and I found this winery. We won't have this wine in the lineup, but the minute I had her sparkling Cinsault, I looked at her and I said, you need to be in our wine club. So she is a fan of the Forgotten Grapes, and so we're excited to have her.
Yes, the second best sparkling Cinsault that is out there.
Yours has not been released yet, so you cannot make that claim.
No, but I did the dosage tasting today, and it is
you still
it is wonderful.
Make that claim until it is bottled awesome. And out there.
Okay, fair enough. Last but certainly not least, a little bit of some sad news. Last month, one of our longtime Forgotten Grapes Wine Club members, Barbara Jean Yankee, passed away due to cancer. I don't know how many of you knew Barbara Jean. She had joined us on a few of the virtual tastings over the years, but she had been a longtime supporter of both my wine shop and the wine club from the very beginning. So we are saddened by her loss, and definitely want to dedicate, this episode and this virtual tasting to her memory. We know she's drinking some great wine up there in the court beyond. Yes, exactly.
Barbara Jean.
To Barbara Jean. Yes, exactly. All right. On a brighter note, let us bring in this month's featured winemaker, Nate Axline of RZN Wines. One of the most interesting stories that I know we will get into about how he got into wine and became a winemaker and launched his own brand.
Although Chris never had to give you a reason to try these wines.
That is fair. Nice pun. You're supposed to do a little rim shot when you say stuff like that. I think we've got all sorts of puns that we're going to be making tonight. We can talk about, yes, the power of reason and whatnot. But we're excited to have Nate here. And Nate, we always start off by asking the most important question, which is, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you have ever opened?
Ooh, that's good. first, thanks for having me. And I would say I'm torn between two bottles. One being like just, it was just like a holy, like, not like a holy grail wine, but it was just like fell in my lap, like, oh my gosh. I didn't expect it to be as good as it was when I helped out at a restaurant near where I'm at, because I'm, yeah, near Santa Barbara in Lompoc, but a restaurant opened. They had a 76 Chateau Montelena cab,
Oh, wow.
and it was super fresh, fruity, still lively. And I was just like, how did they do this? Like, it's just like one of those like kind of, yeah, aha moments of like, wow, this is like crazy that this can happen. Um, being that one being like the shock one, but the what really kind of got me was some Chenin from Loire, producer Arnaud Lambert. His almost any Chenin he makes, mainly the Clos de Midi, which is kind of his like entry Chenin, but it's actually what sparked me to make wine versus drinking it. Because by that time I was already in the wine business for a few years doing like sales tasting room stuff.
Mhm.
But when I had his Chenin, it was one of those like, why doesn't anyone make it like this here? So it was kind of like that was like the, you know, first spark or like kind of more intense spark of like I could I could do something like that where I'm at.
Right. So why doesn't anyone make it here like there?
Well, it's the same reason we're on this call. It's one of those, it's forgotten grapes. It was, I think, just in general in Santa Barbara County, Chenin Blanc is just it's around loosely, but like no one, it doesn't seem like anyone really pushes it versus I've seen some places up north like Sonoma, even not so much Napa, but just in that Northern California,
Yeah.
there's
A lot of Clarksburg Chenin Blanc coming out of there.
yeah, there is more of like a push like of like this kind of like it's this chameleon grape, very similar to Chardonnay, like great fruit, great acid, great richness on how you kind of play with it. And but for me, yeah, just a lot of people were just kind of taking it middle of the road, like, oh, we just make it like our Chardonnay, and it's it was always kind of meh. But yeah, tasting the Loire stuff, I was like, man, there's something here. I'm like, there's Chablis and Merceau. Like, there's those two versions of Chardonnay.
Right.
There's for sure two versions that we could probably do around here, and that's what kind of pushed me to like, let's see what we can do.
Well, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I know we're going to get into your Chenin later, but I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
between Loire Valley Chenin Blanc and even Chenin Blancs from South Africa, when you know how incredible that grape is and how it evolves as it ages, it is surprising that more people don't do it because people who know it love it.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's very similar to Grenache in that sense that it can be incredibly versatile and made in 1,000 different ways, it feels like. And yeah, we'll definitely dive deeper into Chenin Blanc when we get to that wine. But we are
oh
going to
yeah.
kick off with your Clairette Blanche, the 2022 Clairette Blanche that we've got right there with the fun little Cubert design there on the front.
And the best part of RZN Wines is every label looks different, so you can tell them apart.
Yes, and you color coded them, which I also greatly appreciate. Like color coding to me is rule number one in proper branding of wine is, do not let the consumer know exactly what that wine is when they're looking for it, when they're looking at it and how it separates from the rest of your line. So thank you for
Oh,
that.
you're very welcome. No,
It's
well,
just happy
even
because when he was unloading his car, he didn't have to work as hard to look at each bottle as he handed them off.
These are facts actually, and when I realign them to have 3 rows of 4 per case of each wine, I can easily check to make sure I'm not doing doubles of anything.
bingo, yes, color coded. No, it goes back to, yeah, because before I was in wine, I was in the action sports world, and so like branding and marketing was always a big piece of just everything. So it's like that's kind of where I tend to translate a lot of that to the labels and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I want to talk a little bit about your background in action sports, and you were in the sales world there. But it's interesting how those are two businesses that are very wine and action sports, where they're very graphics heavy. The merchandise, the branding is really identifiable by artwork. And in many cases, it feels like there's traditional models, but then there's also this sort of outlandish, the garish, like, the wilder, the better style.
Oh yeah, no, and that's what's been kind of fun. Like, cause like I said before, I started in the sales side of like the tasting room, as that's where I was kind of more focused on the action sports side, uh, more focused on the skateboarding, and then dabbled a little bit in like snowboard, surf, ski world. But well, that's what I always thought was fun. Like as I got into wine and seeing all the labels, I'm like, man, there's a lot of this stuff that's very similar. Like everyone kind of sticks to a similar page
Mhm.
in a sense. And of course, like even where I kind of fall into a little bit of the natural wine world, there's kind of this whole change of like tons of people just doing like a photo, and really the back label has the info. But for me, yeah, it was full on the graphic. Like it's like having like a professional skateboard deck. A lot of guys, there was like a very special graphic like Tony Hawk. It was like one certain thing, and you kind of stuck with it for a long time. So for me it was kind of like, as I come up with them for now, the wine labels, it's fun to just like, because I'll get the wine going first, and then just kind of like as I'm tasting it, or just as time goes on, I'll just kind of like images pop in my head of like, oh, this could look like this. And yeah, it's just, you just move it around and boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, and you've taken the kind of magazine approach, magazine cover approach to it, which I really love because I'm a visual information junkie. So the more little Easter eggs and things you can plant there and little symbols and whatnot, the more intriguing it is for me. And I suspect you hear that from a lot of your buyers and your fans out there.
Oh yeah, no, it's been a super fun to hear, uh because I get a lot of like graphic design people come up, and they're like, who does your label? I was like, I do them. They're like, oh, blah blah, and like they want to get real detailed. I'm like, well, I'm not like a big time graphic designer. It's like but to go back in, of all things, in back in high school, I actually took journalism like all of high school. So
Mhm.
like it was kind of that piece of skateboarding, of doing the other stuff. So like photography, writing. It also didn't hurt that I got to take my friends out of classes to come hang out.
Right, you got to
We
do
were
interviews with
doing
them and photo
interviews. Yeah.
shoots. Yeah.
um, but yeah, that was kind of, yeah, exactly what sparked it. It was like what stands out, and like with those magazines, they were always so fun. Like you have your header, which is the logo, and then so every bottle has its own issue in lieu of like that magazine style, because there's like the pro issue, the interview issue,
Right.
every yeah,
The
every month.
swimsuit issue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll get to a swimsuit issue for one of these bottles.
I
Yeah,
don't
we
know if I'm excited to see you in a Speedo, but I'm sure there
right.
are people who are. So
Yeah, especially post harvest
You
is the
should be an
best
equal
time.
opportunity. It should not just be about, one-sided bathing suits.
that's why I said him as Speedo. I mean, he could wear a bikini too, whatever he wants, one piece, however you want to
Yeah,
rock it.
yeah. I'm gonna be comfortable, and
There you
then
go.
but yes,
So
it's yeah, super fun to kind of like play with it, and each one has its own kind of character, outside of like design wise.
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this Clairette Blanche because while it's not a, new grape historically, it is definitely something that is new here to the United States. I think, before I would say 2016, 2017, you rarely, if ever, saw this grape here. So how did you become involved with it? How did you find it and decide I want to work with this grape. I want to make a single varietal wine version of it.
Oh yeah. So this is gonna be a fun one because it's one of those kind of just it fell in my lap kind of grapes. Um, to pull it back as everything leads back to Chenin Blanc as
Yeah.
where I start. But for this particular vintage, 22, I actually had like saved up money from the previous vintages because 2021 I only made Chenin Blanc, and then 22 was like gonna be my like, okay, let's bulk it up. And I was trying to buy more grapes of Chenin, and the vineyard company was like, hey, guess what? We don't have any. So go down the street and go see what they have because we have a couple extra things. And it worked out because it was literally down the street. So if you guys happen to look at a map of Santa Barbara County, near Los Alamos area,
Mhm.
the Chenin Blanc vineyards, Tres Hermanas, it's on the very tiny tail tip of Santa Maria AVA. And then just southeast a tiny bit is Nolan Ranch, where these grapes come from.
Okay.
So they are like within 5 minutes of driving um, to each other, but totally different topography. But I went over, checked it out, and I tasted probably about half a dozen different grapes. And the Clairette and the Mencia both were the best tasting grapes. Like to me, for at the moment, and I was like, oh wow, like this is cool. And I had literally even before that, I had never even heard of Clairette Blanche either. I was like, wait, what is this for sale? And it just was intriguing. So I was like, these taste cool. Like it just tasted different. So I was like, let's give it a whirl. So I went to the vineyard, did that grape tasting on a Friday, had the grapes delivered on Monday, and boom, here we are.
Wow. So
Yeah.
when you're taking in a new grape like this, what's your protocol? Do you just kind of continue doing what you've done with other wines? Are you researching it? Are you talking to others who have worked with this? How do you decide what protocol you're going to do in terms of, harvest, crushing, stainless versus oak, yeasts, all those things?
Yeah, no, well, as you guys will hear and learn, I try and do as little as possible. So for all these, all spontaneous, like natural fermentations. So I'll process the fruit, which is just let it go, or I'll squeeze the juice out. It'll settle in tank for a day, and then put that juice into neutral barrels to just ferment on its own. So I pretty much just put it in there and just let it ride, and then check on it every couple of days to see how the ferment's going. And then once it's done fermenting, it gets filled up and then kind of just hangs out from there. But for specifics, when I got this, I had a feeling that already I'm working with a Rhone white, so it's gonna be this kind of mid acid, mid kind of middle of the wheelhouse.
Mhm.
So I didn't want to push it too hard on either way. So I was just kind of, as I mentioned, just went neutral, let the juice do its thing, which is exactly what I do with the Chenin as well. Um, so with
Well, it's
this,
got great acidity.
yeah, no, and that's where I try and, like I mentioned, I get lumped into the natural wheelhouse, not because I'm like, oh, that natural wine's the only way to go. It's just I just try and not do anything
Right.
and just let the grapes do the talking. So it's like hence the neutral barrels, spontaneous ferments, um, and just yeah, just kind of see what happens, which is very risky,
Yeah.
uh, but very rewarding at the same time.
Yeah. So you're not inoculating these with any yeast. These are just all natural yeast that you're allowing to ferment in barrel.
Bingo. Yeah, and uh, I actually don't even own any yeast. It's one of those things where it's just kind of fun that as my like normal day paying job. I learned a lot that kind of pushed me, or they didn't push me, but it was very eye opening in the sense of what can happen and what little you had to do to kind of get to this kind of, you know, from start to finish, grape to wine kind of thing.
Right, right. Yeah, Clairette Blanche is one of those grapes that like the versions I have tasted that have been the best for me always have that really strong bracing acidity and just a ton of minerality. And I think you've really nailed it with this one. Given, what can you tell us about the Nolan Ranch Vineyard? Obviously, just down from Tres Hermanos, but are there any specific geographic factors or terroir issues, soil composition that makes it ideally suited for Clairette Blanche?
Oh yeah, no. So that was also one of the things I was actually really excited when I was trying to do, or when I was going to go check out these grapes, because it is on my drive to go see Tres Hermanos. So I have to drive by it every time, and every time I was like, man, that would be a cool vineyard to get fruit from. Mostly being on the topography side, it is all hillsides.
Mm.
So it's all these like light rolling hills that end up being like I almost think there is no like flat land. There are like some lower level, like mellower hills,
Yeah.
but it is almost not flat. And specific, so for the Clairette, it's going to be on the more western side of the vineyard. So just a tiny bit cooler air.
Yeah.
And it's
Less harsh afternoon sun, gets more of that softer morning sun.
yeah, and the hillside it's on, it is more on the south facing, but then there's another hill right in front of it. So that late afternoon sun kind of gets dipped behind the hillsides. And then
And it is the Santa Maria Valley, so the proximity to the ocean and the cool ocean breeze that comes in.
bingo, yeah, because it's just an offshoot of Fox and Canyon Road.
Mhm.
So just under Fox and Canyon, and it being is actually it's our newest AVA for the county, being Alisos Canyon AVA.
Okay.
And also this vineyard too, it's mostly Rhone, predominant, and then a couple of fun little other things like, well, obviously the Mencia in there as well. But yeah, there's over a dozen different grapes that were just I almost like couldn't decide one to pick. But again, this is where I was just tasting through stuff, and taste wise, this and the Mencia were like right where I wanted them, and I was like, yeah, bring them in. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
they actually have 18 different varieties planted at the Nolan Ranch, so there's
Yeah,
some fun stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's all like all in this wheelhouse of what we're talking about, just all different stuff. And that's what, like I said, it made it hard to kind of like, oh, well, let's go check out this and that. But yeah, when it came down to it, what was there, but also what, like I said, tasted great. Because even when these grapes came in, I was like, I don't know what this smell is, but I like it.
Yeah. Um, Patty wants to know, Patty and David, they've never had this grape before. Is it classical for its type, this taste and the nose on it? And I think so. Again, the versions that I have had, it's a staple of the Southern Rhone Valley, and especially down in Provence, places like Cassis, down on the Mediterranean coast. Clairette is kind of a staple of the whites down there. So it tends to have that real bright acidity to it, and a lot of that that minerality, as I mentioned. So I think you're hitting a lot of those buttons with a lot of that classical taste. But obviously, there's a little bit more fruit. It's not as lean as some of the French versions, I imagine. Have you had a chance to taste some of the European Clairettes or some of the other Clairettes out there to compare it to this?
I haven't just yet, but I've listening to a bunch of podcasts of all things. There was some producers up north that, of all things, do Chenin Blanc, and this is like their new it's like their new Chenin Blanc. Like they're
Mm.
super jacked up, want to try and get more planted. But in a similar wheelhouse, yeah, it's that it's a fun one because it is almost like it's always hard to describe to a lot of people what it's like, but it's like because it's like Grenache Blanc, but it's like Viognier, but it's got some tiny pieces of Picpoul. There's this
Right.
kind of like little bit of everything for a Rhone white.
I
But
almost think of it like a Rhone Chablis, like in the right way with that minerality and that crispness. I know that's blasphemy to some people, but it's you know,
Yeah, you
you're
just have it as like Clairette Blanche is a delicious white grape. Why do you have to liken it to something else?
because that's how people understand and learn is, you like, this is the call her daddy of, wine club podcasts is what we're doing here. So but no, it's a delicious. It doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't have another name. It's pretty commonly known in France. They kind of dropped the Blanche over there and just call it Clairette. But I believe it's one of the 13 grapes allowed in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And as I mentioned, you find it quite a bit in whites, in Provence, in Cassis. What little white production there is in Bandol includes this as well, and definitely in the southern Rhone Valley as well. And you're starting to see it. I mean, the versions I've had of it, I know here in Paso Robles, Tablas Creek was kind of a standard bearer. In fact, I think they may have been the one who brought it over. No, they're not.
They brought it over, but the very first to bottle it was Acquiesce.
Yes, but I know, yeah, you're right. But I know that they were the ones who brought it over, is what I was going to say. And then yes,
Yeah.
Acquiesce and Lodi, I believe she bought some of their cuttings.
And was the first to bottle it as a single varietal wine.
Yeah, yeah. And then I know Pais sur Terre also here in Paso Robles does a Clairette Blanche that's quite lovely. It's starting to catch on. I think, like you said, in the same way that Chenin Blanc, which we'll talk about, is starting to make a comeback. I think you're starting to see more of this, more of Vermentino being planted as kind of these hardier Rhone, Provençal varietals that are starting to make a comeback on the white side. So.
And I would say that while I don't know what Sandy and Larry are eating, for Pam and her husband, I would bet the mozzarella of your caprese salad, the fattiness of that with the acidity of the wine would be a really good synergy.
Yes. A good balance of acid with the tomatoes and the balsamic vinegar as well, which I suspect they've got on top of it as well. So it's a good classic caprese. Cool, Nate. We always ask our winemakers what are some of the food pairings. Nice segue there. That you would pair with this. So what have you paired with this? What do you think would go well with this Clairette Blanche?
Well, to even tie back to as we talked about the labels, very similar. How I come up with colors are very similar things that I think of almost food wise too. So like even label wise, like the yellow and green, all those pieces. Like I actually am a fan of like almost like some veggies are super fun. Like I'm a big fan of like throwing stuff on the grill. Obviously where I'm at, close to Santa Maria. So Santa Maria style grill, like it's always just throwing something on there and give it a little char. Especially when it's time, artichoke, asparagus, those are all great.
The
But
hard to pair foods.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So
No,
maybe it's not the Rhone Chenin, maybe it's the Rhone Gruner Veltliner.
yeah. Because there's just like this little bit of thing that just ticks in the back of my head of like it's like there's this like floral note just a tiny bit to where it just like it kind of goes with these uh just almost like hardier greens, but then like yeah, you kind of mellow them out a little bit with the barbecue, and usually it's like seasoned a little bit. But even and then to kind of like play on that, it's like even some like uh just light dressed pastas, like just a little olive oil, maybe throw in some tomatoes, like it just cherry tomatoes or something like simple.
Some
But
fresh basil in there, something like that.
yes, yeah, like a little. It's just because it's just like as I described the wines. I try and make it like I'm a big pro less is more person.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, and to Larry and Sandy who are having a Boursin cheese with crackers. Yeah, it's the creaminess of cheese, the creaminess of any sort of meat that will work really nicely with the acidity. The acidity will cut through that richness and not get weighted. Neither will weight each other down.
Yes.
So.
And just a homonymic point to make, the red Bordeaux style blends are called Clairette, which is Claret. This is Clairette. So different. If you walk into a store and say, I'd really like a Clairette, make sure you designate it as Clairette Blanche, because if not, you're going to get a Bordeaux style red wine with your Clairette. Last question about this one. Actually, I have two more questions. First, I have to ask why this wine is the love letters issue of your magazine series.
Oh yeah. No. Well, just as you alluded earlier, this is probably like the heaviest Easter egg label. Being to not make it too long, but as actually you mentioned Cubert, that was kind of like the funny thing as I was bottling wines at the winery, and this pattern emerged when I was pulling cases of glass.
Mhm.
And that's what kind of first popped in my head. But as kind of time progressed, in the skateboard world, I have it's there's kind of a joke in my head. It's similar to like famous people. Like you always have the like there's one famous person that you share a birthday with. And so like instead of sharing a birthday with Tom Cruise, I share a birthday with a pro skateboarder, and this was in relation to that. So the pro skateboarder, he's passed away. He was an older, like an 80s pro skateboarder, but his name is Jeff Grosso. And one of his first skateboard graphics was a doll playing with toy blocks. So I've kind of initiated the toy blocks. And instead of saying, obviously it was his name, but so with this, it's got the Clairette Blanche. And then that toy doll, if you guys look at the very end of Blanche, there's a tiny little heart, and that little tiny heart was on the toy doll on his board. And then then go to the main reason why we're answering this question. The love letters issue is he did a YouTube series called The Love Letters to Skateboarding.
Okay.
So then as like a tie-in, because at first I had everything set up except for what to call the issue. And so I was like, what do I call this? And I'm like, oh, well, he had a thing called the love letters. And I just loved how that like even just kind of came through like just as it was.
So this is Nate's love letter to skateboarding.
Bingo.
And to Jeff, and a tribute to Jeff Grosso. Yes.
And to his birthday twin. And
yeah.
Yeah, no, it is one of those funny things that just like I just kept going down a rabbit hole. The more and more I kind of added to it, and I was like, okay, like I gotta stop here. Like this is good.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I have to say, like, just from the color scheme, you're absolutely right. Like my initial thought when I was tasting this was squash blossoms. Fried squash blossoms, possibly even with some goat cheese stuffed inside, would go phenomenally with this. And like that color scheme just brings up squash blossoms to me. So is this a grape that you mentioned it was basically in 2022 you started working with it because you couldn't get the Chenin Blanc? I know you're back to working with Chenin. Is this a grape that you're going to continue working with, or what's your plan with it?
Yes. So and for how fun and as when we get to the Chenin 2, as soon as I got it in the barrel and it was fermenting, and I knew I wanted to keep working with it. So there is a 23 vintage that I bottled not too long ago, but harvest happened, and so it's in bottle but it's not labeled yet. I have all the labels. I just didn't get around to it yet. So there's a 23 vintage. And then also, as we mentioned, this harvest, I did do a 24 that I just put the like leftovers into kegs for topping wine. So yeah, I have
Nice.
a 23 and 24 on the way.
Will you keep a similar motif with the label for the Clairette, or will you do something completely different for
Oh
the
no,
23 and 24?
this is the
That's
label.
it.
Yep.
So Clairette Blanche is the love letters. This will be the same from now on.
Bingo. Yeah, and that's actually to go down the old Easter egg rabbit hole too. All the bottles, the logo will always stay the same.
Mhm.
What I've dubbed the like where the vintage is what I kind of consider the barcode for a magazine. And then the volume issue, the volume is always the count of vintages I've done. So
Okay,
we're tasting a 22 was my third vintage.
got
And
it.
then the issue is when that kind of wine took place. So Clairette was the sixth wine I've ever made.
Oh, okay,
Um,
very cool.
so on that note, that's going to be the only difference is yeah, you'll see the vintage change and the volume change for this graphic for all the going forward vintages and for all
Got it.
the bottles too.
So it can go volume 4, 5, 6, but will always be issue number 6.
Bingo. Yep.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of issues, let's move on to that Chenin Blanc that we were already talking about. And this is one that I know you switched issues on because initially we had talked about the 00 version, which was the 22, but
Yes.
you were such low inventory that we moved on to the 23, which is not the 00, it's the lightning issue. So tell us a little bit about this one.
Yeah. So this one I've kind of played with. So given I've made it the most, um, from starting from back in 2020, and the 2020 was actually like the only one that kind of changed the most because I actually called it the inaugural issue because it was the very first one I ever made.
Right.
And that one was 00. So if anyone's not familiar, it means 0 added, 0 taken away. So nothing added, nothing taken away. And so it is like the extreme of a natural wine. So no yeast, no sulfur, no fining, no filtering, just fermented grape juice. And it actually turned out really good. I just wish I would have bottled it sooner. So we fast forward. As the fun part of winemaking, it's the progression and how do I do things better. And so paying a lot more attention. Then in 21, I had a little bit more grapes to play with. And so it was kind of fun to then I split what I had. So I ended up having 3 barrels and I did 2 barrels in the 00 style with no nothing. But then I was like, well, what if I just do a little bit of sulfur? So just a tiny bit of sulfur to preserve it. I let it kind of hang in barrel a little longer and bottle it totally different. So the 00 is something it's like once it goes clear and is finished wine, you bottle it right away.
Mm-hmm.
And with it's actually that black oval is actually the kind of the tell. That's usually where I write 00.
The special edition.
Yeah, it's special. That's the only thing other than the issue number that changes between the two. So if you saw them from afar, even from like 10 feet away, you would think they were the same wine. But that's like the biggest difference. But same vineyard, same process. The only difference is special edition that we're having has a little bit of sulfur, which then I give it a little more barrel time. And again, it depends too on the vintage of how much I have or don't have. Because to me, it's fun as a winemaker to play with different stuff. So it's in this case, it's the extreme of just a little bit of sulfur or not. But yeah, so this special edition 23 vintage, just a cooler, longer season. So normally I see these grapes ripen around sometime in October. So early pickings or early October. I want to say this was kind of like third week October. Um, but yeah, just intense fruit. As we kind of started off saying, like, I always thought it was a fun one because it was that different aspects of Chenin I've thought about. I'm probably not going to do it because it's a lot of work, but this as like a sparkling wine is super cool. Um,
Yeah.
but as just like a low intervention, still just, and I, on top of that, more natural side is I try and pick it a little earlier to keep that natural acidity high
Mhm.
so that it's its own kind of way to kind of keep things in check.
Yeah.
So yeah,
The
lower
acid
pH,
is the
fresh.
acid is definitely there, but to me, what's most intriguing about this wine is it's got such a richness to it. It's got this really sort of rich, smooth body, and there's almost a little bit of oxidation and almost an oak element. Are you still doing this in neutral oak, or how is it picking up this kind of richness to it?
Oh,
Yeah, full on. Yeah, that just that age time in barrel um, is what's gonna like kind of kick it in because especially the 0.0 versions tends to be a little bit fruitier, but I keep relating it to Chardonnay because that's usually the ones that people think of, but it's one of those ones where given the right site and right situation, there's plenty of texture. Because I then think of other than Loire, but like Vouvrays, given the off dry version of Chenin, there's a nice richness to it. And obviously we're in a whole different ballpark, so it's kind of fun to see what happens in different locations. Because I know in hindsight, I would love to make multiple Chenins, but there's very, very few places that have it just in general, and let alone for sale too.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit of a rarity. I know the winery that I share space with, tasting room space with, they do a Chenin Blanc, and it's their only non-Paso winery because they source it from Clarksburg. Because Clarksburg has the three elements, similar to the Loire. It's got the river, or the water. It's got the siltier soils, and then it's got the cooler breezes coming in from a cooler climate. So um, it's super interesting in that sense. Um, do you have, given your love for the Loire and things, do you have I know you do most hands-off winemaking, but do you have a style that you're sort of emulating with this?
Uh, uh,
Or are you trying to steer it in certain directions as much as you can?
Sort of. The for the most part, it kind of, as we've already talked about, food friendly. Like to me, it's because I know as I went transitioned literally from action sports to wine, um, because I was more so just hanging out, drinking bottles with friends a lot of times, and it wasn't as much with food. But at the same time, like as I've progressed and enjoyed more wines, more friends, it's one of those big pieces of like, how do we do this longer? How can we enjoy more in a sense, but also, um, you know, be interesting at the same time. So it's like I try and just stay out of the way of letting the fruit do the talking,
Mhm.
and but then also that freshness aspect of it just making it interesting every taste. And then same like just like as we've saying with food, but then I don't know, it's been interesting because as I say, the hands off, it's a little bit of just like I I get stressed, but I also am like one of the least stressful people I know. And
We're
it
we're getting we're getting that vibe.
yeah, and some co-employees at the many places or other places that I've been at or work with, they're a lot higher strung, and they're like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I'm like, I don't know. Let's just see what happens. So it's fun, but it's a good way to put it too is it's a lot more proactiveness in the winery, and just letting the grapes and the juice do its thing is kind of the fun of kind of where it lands.
Yeah. I have to ask, is there a lot of crossover between the action sports community and the wine community? Are there, like, is wine a big component of action sports? It's not exactly sort of the first thing that I think of when I think of, snowboarding and skating.
It is not even close. No, it's a great idea, but totally not there. No, it's one of those things where I was actually in the tail end of like my action sports working career. I had a few friends that started some small brands, but they were crossovers. So it was like there was like a skateboard brand that also made like outdoors tools. So it was kind of like this neat idea of like taking two different worlds and just putting them together. But it also kind of sparks new ideas and new dialogue and new ways of thinking about things. So it's very similar of like doing skateboard tricks to me, of like making the wines in the sense of like, oh, work, you show up and you kind of see what you have to work with, and you just kind of play it as it goes versus trying to force something into a certain realm because that's how it's supposed to be. So it's kind of fun. But yeah, there's no no tie-in. Like most of them are beer drinkers, so it's always kind of fun to like just give this a taste. And so we'll kind of see it. But there's been some guys that they've had some skateboard decks with wine bottles on them, or even there's been a couple of shoes that are wine related. So it's kind of fun. It's around. It's just not as big as it could be.
I mean,
But you're slowly converting them one taste at a time.
Yeah. I'm trying. We're getting closer. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I can see like, wine. Yeah, I can see, RZN X, like insert famous skater here, like doing some one-off small batches of things.
Oh, yeah.
Let me ask you then, how did you make that transition? How did you move from what was your catalyst to move from action sports to wine and get involved and start making your own wine?
Oh yeah, no. Well, originally it was I worked at a skate shop, like a skate surf shop. Given I grew up mostly skateboarding focused, so that's kind of always the kind of tie back is usually skateboarding. But with the shop there was surfing, and then I kind of graduated to a bigger shop that had snowboarding as well, so I kind of got into that. But then fast forward is once I left the shop, I actually worked for, of all things, a snowboard ski outerwear brand, which many people know the brand, just don't realize they make snow stuff. And that being O'Neill, the surf brand.
Yeah.
So they have a whole snow division. I worked for them, managed sales for the US, but it was very seasonal. So it was a full-time job, being I got paid year round, but our whole premise was sell everything in 6 months during the winter time.
Yeah.
So I had the summer essentially off, and by the second summer I had off, I had a buddy who worked at a winery here in Santa Rita Hills and was like, hey, do you want to come help us pour wine? And I'm like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like, I don't know anything about it. And they're like, you just got to pour it. It's great. Like, sure, I'll give it a go. But as soon as I met the owner, winemaker, and they're like, do you know anything about wine? I was all, not a clue, but I know how to sell stuff. And they're like, perfect. We'll give you a call on like the next day. But from there, I ended up tasting their lineup as obviously Santa Rita Hills, a bunch of different Pinots, different vineyards. And I was like, wait, these are all Pinot, but why do they all taste different? And they're like, all right, that's going to be many years of contemplation. And
That's the 300 level classes. Let's focus on the 100 level for
yeah,
now.
No,
exactly.
but that's when you know you've been bitten by the bug.
It's true.
Oh yeah. And that was literally like, that was right when they said like, yeah, they'll give you a call when to start. Go taste some wine. And I was just like, oh crap. But and from then it was kind of, I just did it on and off for a little bit in the tasting room. But then after about, a year and a half, I was like, this stuff's cool. It's way more interesting. Than because my then running joke was like, doing the action sports stuff, I would be selling, a pink sweater one day, a blue sweater the next season. Nothing really changed other than the colors. And so it was kind of like very repetitious of same thing, different color. But then when I was getting into wine, it's like, there's a reason there's a vintage. There's a reason there's thousands of different grapes. It's always evolving. It's always changing. And Mother Nature is very fun in trying to keep us guessing on what's going to happen next. So it was just like this neat thing of it, just organized chaos is kind of what I dumb it down to. Like, we try and do the same thing every year to try and make a great end product, but in the end, it's the vintage, and what happens that time is how it's going to be.
Yeah. And so that was you moved from the tasting room to the cellar at that point.
Yeah. So got into the sales side. So I was the tasting room, and I did a little bit of back end. And just for fun, that first winery I was at was Babcock Winery. And then as I was trying to go full time, I ended up finding a job with Jackson Family in Santa Maria with Cambria Wines, and I ended up being the tasting room manager there. And where I live now, Lompoc, I knew of, but that's one of my main jobs now is Liquid Farm, Chardonnay, Pinot. They were opening a tasting room, and they're like, I ran into the winemaker. He's like, hey, we're opening a tasting room. I was like, oh yeah, I know you're opening a tasting room. It's like, you should apply. Sure. Applied, got the job, helped build out the tasting room a little bit before it opened. And then within 6 months, the 19 harvest came, and the winemaker had one of his like helpers leave like a month before harvest. And I had mentioned like, hey, if you ever need help, I'd be happy to help a little bit. And next thing you know, he's like, hey, we need help for like a month. I'm like, sure. And I've been stuck ever since.
Next thing you know, you're spraying down and scrubbing and disinfecting everything.
Oh yeah, it was the second day there. I was cleaning barrels, and the winemaker was like, "Hey, what do you think about assistant winemaker?" I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? Like, I just been cleaning barrels." But at the same time, it's been all these years of being on the sales side. There's every question, like, how's this done? How's that done? But I was proactive with a lot of friends that we had some tasting groups, just like doing this before Zoom was a big thing. It was just, just get as many bottles as you can, taste them with a bunch of friends. And I kind of got like a fast forward on the wine world. But in hindsight, just got the bug, got stuck. And then, I love the cellar work. It's been super fun.
Yeah, except for the fact that you have to deal with James Sparks every day, but
It's all right. It could be worse.
That's true. That's
true.
James is far more kind of your vibe than Jeff, the owner of Liquid Farm.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, Jeff, he loves his champagne, and and then it's almost like a trickle down to where James is like, he does have his like rigidness of processes and like, oh, we have to do it like this. And then that's really the person that complains the most when I make my wine. He's like, "Oh, why don't you do this?" I'm like, "No." I almost do it just to make him mad sometimes.
He can't handle the laissez-faire attitude.
Yeah, yeah. He's like, "No, no, no. There has to be a purpose." And I'm like, "We'll see what happens." And he's just, yeah, it's great every time.
Oh, there's no better way to trigger somebody with ADHD than by not doing something that they want you to do.
Exactly. Yeah, no, well, that's been my running joke is the day I make him business cards, it's gonna say sulfur consultant as the job title. Yeah,
I
he
love
hated it when I went no sulfur that first year. He's like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" Like, see
Do you
what
want to
happens.
ruin your wine?
Yeah, exactly. But I've turned his tune because that 22 Chenin that I only have a few cases left, but it's a 0-0, no nothing, and it ended up singing actually a year after it was bottled. It actually got better and just like a tiny reductive, and even James is like, "Oh crap, like I have to eat my words, like this is pretty good." I'm like, you just get out of the way.
Hopefully you somehow have that recorded for posterity that you got one over on him. Make a plaque and
Oh
present it
yeah,
to
no,
him.
every time I have some open bottles, he's like, what are you doing with the Chenin? And I'm like, "That's not yours. You could buy some like everybody else."
So two things before we move on. Let's talk food
Sure.
pairings with this Chenin Blanc first and
Yeah.
foremost.
Oh yeah. No, this one of my favorites is well, when I say favorites, it's also very loose, but I'm just a super pork fan, food wise. The savoriness, but also just flavors, up and down, um, baked, breaded, sandwiched. Um, it, it's almost like a win-win either way. I just I'm just such a big fan pork wise. So it's like it's almost like it's that little bit of savory, so that the freshness, as you guys said, even with that claret and the mozzarella, it's like it just cuts through the fattiness. But especially with this vintage, the texture, there's a little bit of richness that hangs in there, coats the mouth really well. Um, even what was it? A great one. I haven't done it physically, but it pops in my head is in Los Alamos, Bob's Well Bread.
Mhm.
Um, he does a
Favorite place.
yes. Oh man, anytime like when my wife was pregnant, we were going there like once, twice a month, and she's like, "Well, let's go." I'm like, "Sure." I kind of
Anytime
want
I'm
Bob.
up there, I go out of my way to have
I was gonna
breakfast.
say, and that's not an easy drive from Lompoc to Los Alamos.
No, yeah, it's
Well, it's 15 minutes.
yeah, depends how fast you drive, but
See?
that's also one of my favorite things is since I'm in Lompoc, that is on the way to the vineyard visits.
True.
So, it's one of those hardships I have to bear of driving by all the time and oh
Twist,
darn.
twist your arm.
Yeah.
Who here's been to Bob's Well Bread? Raise your hand. See, everybody
All right,
knows.
just a few.
Yeah.
Best place.
Yes.
Yeah.
The pastries, the bagels, the English muffins, oh,
Very good. And then why is the Chenin Blanc the lightning issue?
Well, even before I came up with the name Reason or RZN, it's a double one. It's however you want to pronounce it. Doesn't matter. It's the right way either way. I always wanted like one of the kind of going back to the styles of I always wanted to make lightning in a bottle. So it was kind of an ode to that, and I had a different name in mind, but it was too similar to a different wine label already out. So, oh, and actually, as we're talking about it, for the whole purpose of the RZN, all those letters are initials.
Mhm.
R for my wife Rochelle, Z for my son Zane, and then the N for Nate. So
Very nice.
You didn't
Yeah.
need to give us a reason.
No reason, or sometimes reasons altogether. But
So when your son takes over, he'll change it to Zern.
yes, yeah, well, hence that's why the wife always comes first, and she's the number one letter on there.
And he finds the two of you together, so he's in the middle.
Yes, he's the melting pot of keeping it going.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it was super fun because it was.
How old is your son?
He's gonna be 4 next month.
And
Nice.
and so you named him Zane so you could name your label Reason.
Bingo. Yes.
Yeah. Because I was gonna say you're on
If you couldn't call him Aaron and be Ran.
because these are volume 4 wines, so you're currently on volume 6. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, so it ended up, yeah, we had just picked his name. Well, talk about tying it together. We had already picked his name, and we were driving to Bob's when we were talking out loud what we should call the label. And as my wife likes to say, as I was talking about the label, and she was sitting in the passenger seat minding her own business. But I was like, man, what if we did initials and last name? We're all going to have the same last name, which is a lot of A's. So for Axline, and I was like, Raisin? No, that's not probably the best way to put it. So it was also like a tie to even like the action sports world at one time. There was a few brands that actually got rid of vowels. They used numbers. So it was kind of like it all fell into place, like, oh, RZN, or pronounce it Reason, which there was a skate video called The Reason the year I started skateboarding. So it was just like a whirlwind of, oh yeah, this is it.
The rest of the world has no correlation between skating and wine, but Nate has found it.
I am skating along with it. That's for sure.
I was really hoping that you were driving to Bob's Wellbred and the Hoobastank song came on the radio, and that was the inspiration for it.
Oh yeah, no, and it's been funny because of course, like with social media, and then I'm like, I start typing things in. I'm like, oh, people use this acronym, but at the same time, like, if you put wines after it, it's its own new thing. So I'll take it for that.
I think it's a defendable trademark, so I think you're safe there.
Yeah, got enough bottles made after it.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the more issue, the Mourvèdre, the 2022 Mourvèdre. And this is issue number 3. So this is the 3rd grape that you worked with. I have to ask now, what are issue 1 and issue 2?
Oh yeah. So issue 1, that is actually the 00 Chenin.
Oh, okay. You just have it different from the Lightning because this has issue 4 on it. So.
Bingo. Yeah. So
the Lightning is different than the 00.
Yeah,
I'm seeing that, but it's the same grape.
Special edition. Yeah, that's really because even the 00 has Lightning issue. Mm-hmm. But it's the special edition 00s that's the only really change.
That's the differentiator.
Bingo. Yeah. So issue 1, 00 Chenin. Issue 2 was actually, it was 1 barrel of the Chenin that didn't fit, and there might have been some leftover white wine in the winery at the time. So that's actually my like white wine blend. Mm-hmm. At some point, I have some in the garage. I can show you the label, but it's a orange colored. And literally, I just titled it white wine. There was no designation.
The white wine issue.
Yeah, it was just, that was it. And because it was always a running joke of like when people like that aren't as familiar as we might be with wine grapes, I would like to take your white wine, please. And so that was kind of that running piece. So that was the second. And then I got to work with some Mourvèdre early on. I did like literally a 1 barrel one-off, which started this. And this is the second Mourvèdre I've done.
Mhm.
And then
Third Mourvèdre.
this is my
No, it says third vintage, but
bingo.
it's yeah.
Yes.
Remember, that doesn't
Oh,
necessarily mean he's made wine in each of those
your third
volumes.
wine, but also the third time, your
Yeah,
third.
the volume is just vintage in general, not specific to that bottle.
Got it.
But then I'm even looking at the numbers too, because I'm like, which one's that?
It's a
Oh yeah,
nice little piece of shorthand though, because you can easily like go back in your head, like, oh yeah, I made this in, blah blah blah.
yeah, and that's kind of the fun because, well, just like you, Chris, for Easter eggs, I remember like when I got into drinking some Beaujolais and Gamay, they're like, oh, look for the bottle with the S on it. That's the one without sulfur, or this one's with sulfur, or like,
Right.
oh, now I got to look for it. And so those are kind of the fun little things now that I get to play with. Like I said, because I do the whole thing, the website, social, the label designs, packaging, you name it, it's all through me. So it's fun to just play into those details.
And I have to compliment you on this because I have seen people who have designed their own labels and not used a graphic designer, and yours like have a cleanness to them where it still looks professional, but it's fun. It's like right on the cusp between professional, like we are a commercial winery versus like I'm a home winemaker who's just throwing my labels on it, but you lean into the side of the commercial winery, so well done in that.
Thank you. No, and that was similar to what I mentioned earlier. Was whenever I had graphic design people, I'm like, no, 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 no. This is like that's one of my running jokes too. Is there's a reason that there's a lot of different fonts is because I don't actually have to make them.
Right.
They're all there. I just have to pick them out.
Hello, Google
I
Fonts.
have to say, first of all, it's not clip art, Chris.
Yeah.
But
No, I know, but
no,
at the same
but
time,
this is far more as a branding marketing person, I will tell you, I think that you have a very consistent brand. You have it's a brand. The label is consistent, it changes colors. And then you identify each wine with its own identity, but you have a consistent brand.
Yeah.
It's,
But
you.
as somebody who's very familiar with Canva and like, there's a crispness to it and a cleanliness that like reeks of professionalism and like, yeah.
No, and well, and this is well, it's great too that we're on the Mourvèdre because if you look closer, don't look too close because it's not that exciting. But this is like the epitome of like organized chaos labels because it probably took the longest because of all the overlapping.
Mhm.
Because you'll see that there's some borders missing, there's some color blocks that cover things, but they go under another. It's
I see what you're saying now.
is
Yes.
it's one of those funny ones that was very layered when I was doing it, and it was like I was like, oh, this kind of feels like Art Deco-y. Like, let's just keep going and see how much stuff I can bring forward, but also backward, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Send to front, send to back.
yeah. And then especially then when I add a new one, and I'm like, no, not that far back, but this far forward. But yeah, any case, it was. And as we're talking about the label, and the whole reason I called this the more issue was because I wanted more. When I tasted it, I just kept going back and I wanted to drink more and more and more. And I was like, well, I don't want to write the word more, but it's also called Mourvèdre. Like,
It's
this
a
is great.
clever pun. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The back to our original ideas of puns. It was, yeah, I just literally wanted more and more and more. And that's what I called it.
Yeah. So I've noticed this is the only label of yours that doesn't have the vineyard designate on it. So is this a blend of different vineyards?
Uh, it is a single vineyard.
Okay.
But the way in which I got the grapes
Mm.
wasn't directly through the vineyard.
I see. It's one of those situations where you got the grapes, you're just not allowed to say anything about them.
Well, I actually probably could have, and I just didn't didn't try. but it was through, like I said, the of the multiple jobs I have, as we mentioned Liquid Farm being one of them. um, Liquid Farm makes a Mourvèdre rosé, and all those grapes, when I made this, they came from Vogelzang Vineyard in
Mhm.
Happy Canyon. So when we were actually doing this vintage for rosé, I had already kind of lined up, like, with James, the head winemaker. Hey, like, let me know how I can get some of those grapes as well. He's like, oh yeah, I'll just have him add a ton onto whatever pick you want to pick them at. So
Right.
it worked out great because we did that vintage. We did 5 different picks of Mourvèdre grapes,
Oh, wow.
from the earliest being the most extreme lean, acid driven, to where this was the very last pick for what we use for rosé. But when I saw the numbers, I was like, oh, this is perfect for a red wine that I would like to make. Can we make it happen? He's all, yeah, they'll just throw an extra ton on the truck. Perfect. So yeah, all Vogelzang Vineyard, Mourvèdre, um, and kind of tying back to, as we were talking about styles, uh, yeah, like the Chenin and the Clairette made just the same way. And as we get into uh, the Mencia as well, these are made almost the exact same way.
Mhm.
So these being, uh, I destem it all for all the reds. They'll go into steel open top fermenters. Um, and then the big thing though is I got lucky, and Liquid Farm had tried making a little um, side label with Mourvèdre, so I kind of got some practice. But this takes a little more punch downs. So just to kind of stir the grapes into the juice, while it ferments in those steel fermenters, I do 4 times a day.
Oh, wow.
So really, it's not 4 different times. It's like 2 times within like 30 minutes,
Mhm.
because it tends to be very reductive. So it gets real, that kind of funky red smell originally, but kind of where I alluded to is that just that little bit of extra punch down gives it a little more oxygen, a little more, lets that kind of blow off to where
Right.
we get more of these like bright, fresh red fruits.
Yeah. And it's super, I mean, just the color alone in the bottle for a Mourvèdre is so different from most of the Mourvèdre that people are used to drinking from Ballard, from Happy Canyon, from Paso Robles, up and down the Central Coast. Typically it's darker, it's inkier, and this is so light and fresh. Was that the intention, or was this just, because this is how those grapes were being sourced, you kind of went along with it?
uh, Kind of went along with it, and also to bug any of my wine friends, it's one of those things I don't pay attention to, is the color.
Mhm.
I'm never shooting for a color of anything. It was, this is just what happened. And but I think that's also kind of the beauty of that, is because, as I preluded, that I made it the same way as the Mencia. To me, it's kind of an ode to how the grapes were at that time,
Right.
because they get processed the same way, and it's just what the wine does with what it has. But I think too, at the same time, time and place, because even as I mentioned, these vines were technically farmed for rosé of Mourvèdre.
Mhm.
So if my memory is correct, it was probably like a little bit heavier crop, so it's not as like intensely fruited or intense, like uh what it could be for like a heavier kind of wine, for sake for like a red.
Right.
um
Right.
yeah. But I think overall though, but it's also one of my kind of fun ways to talk about for others, if like I'm like, oh yeah, check this out, this is like my version of like if Pinot was better. uh just in case, just more so, yeah, color wise, and but then it's it's lighter, but everything's there. It smells awesome. It tastes awesome. It still has some edge, some tannin. It just has a little bit of everything, even though it looks light.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of, I think a lot of people are gonna look at this and taste it and think it's gonna fall into that like chillable red category, which has become so popular over the last couple of years.
I mean, look at the color. It's almost transparent.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's a trip because and I'm also a big fan of that where chill it if you want or don't. That's kind of like for me, my personal taste. I almost throw like all my reds in the fridge for a little bit,
Hmm.
just and then it's kind of fun to see what they do, like taking them out and seeing what happens.
Nice. No, it's delicious and just again such a different take on Mourvèdre. I can't think of anybody who's making a Mourvèdre in this style, this sort of lighter. Obviously, you see the Mourvèdre rosé, you see the heavier, but this is that kind of, almost like a Beaujolais style, like a chillable style, like we were talking about.
Yep. No, well, I'll give you one of the inspirations. Was actually now gone, but a new version, Dirty and Rowdy.
Yep.
And their Mourvèdre was one that I had early on, like in that kind of early wine career when I got super nerdy and just had to try new stuff. And but they had a bunch of Mourvèdres that were just so awesome and fresh. And that was kind of that's what actually even got Mourvèdre on my radar in general. So it was kind of like, if anything, that was kind of the early play on where I went with this.
Yeah. No, I love it. And I love Mourvèdre is one of my favorite grapes, and it's so nice to see people doing fun versions of it. I've started to see there's a few who are doing carbonic versions of it, and obviously this is not carbonic, but it's got that same color, but done in the same way. Patty and David want to know, if you chill this wine, do you think you'd lose some of the flavor to it?
It will mute it a little bit, but as we're kind of saying there, like, because there is a little edge, so it kind of tames that when you chill it. But I don't know, it's one of those fun ones too, where it depends on like kind of what your situation or timing is of, uh, like, is it during a pool party? Like,
Right.
is it super warm out? Like, you can just chill it and just like enjoy it. Similar is where I say, like, I try not to break the bank too with like pricing on my wines. Like, I try and it kind of goes back to even when I started, like, good price for a good value and good, like, just tastes great. So it's like, my hope is, people buy multiple bottles. So it's like, if you have that day that's hot, chill it down, have fun with it. Don't think about it if you don't want to. But then, we're getting into that little bit colder time. Like, leave it room temp, put the fire on.
Yep.
It's going to be great.
Make a nice London broil or a flank steak or something like that with this. And yeah. And yeah, Patty and David, I mean, with any red, if you chill, you are going to lose a little bit of a flavor component. It's just a natural, but Mourvèdre tends to be so naturally robust and big and, has tannins even in a lighter form, that I don't think you're going to miss too much of it. So it should be fine with a chill. Food pairings with this one, Nate. What are you, go ahead, Allison.
I want to chill because we tend to drink our red wines too warm anyway, and our white wines too cold anyway. So if you put the red wine in the fridge for a half hour before you're going to have it, it's a perfect temperature, whether it's meant to be chilled or not. And if you take your white wines out of the fridge a half hour before you're going to drink them and let them warm up a little, they won't be too cold. So a little chill on red, to the degree that you want it, is not going to affect the flavor. It's just going to enhance.
Helpful hints from Heloise Allison there. Yes. Hell Allison.
Yeah, no, to a T, because that's it. It also goes to the epitome of like, what is cellar temp, because it's like, serve at cellar temp, which you guys know that the average is 55, 58. So you're like, oh yeah, room temp my house, my thermostat's gonna say 65, 68, or like
You
that's
keep
gonna
your
be a lot
house
different
very
than
cold, dude.
I run hot. So even though I'm wearing a beanie and a sweater right now, but
I'm gonna say I'm cold-blooded, so I need heat. Yes.
oh yeah, no, it's I even just
You're
2 days
warm-blooded.
ago, James called me Santa Claus because it was the first time I wore a beanie, but of course it's like bright red, and then someone's like, "Wait, why are you wearing shorts and a beanie?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not hot, but I'm not cold. I don't know. It's
As I skate, bro. Come
yeah,
on.
Not just that, but you lose heat off the top of your head, which is
Yeah.
why if you wear a beanie, you'll stay warmer. This is what they tell skiers all the time. Don't go around without those beanie. Forget the safety. If you take the hat
Yeah.
off, you're going to be cold. You can be in a t-shirt and shorts, but wear a hat. It's amazing.
There you go. Thanks, Mom. Um,
Yeah.
so I think this would actually go great, and hopefully once we finish, Pam can tell us how this pairs with the mushroom pasta that you guys are making, if you're having the Mourvèdre with it or not. Oh, you don't have to unmute yourself. Yeah, you can type it in the chat and we'll go. But let's since we're getting a little short on time, go ahead.
No, it's a great match. The
Okay.
mushroom pasta with the green beans, and it's a light sauce, and it's with a little, from the porcini liquid.
Right.
It's perfect with this light red wine.
See, there you go. It's like you said, what you would make if you could do Pinot but better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll just have to, as we move on to the next wine, let us know at the end if it also works with the other wine.
Yes, which is our last wine of the night. And we kind of started on a fun forgotten grape, and we're finishing with a fun forgotten grape. So this is your 2022 Mencia. We're doing the proper Spanish pronunciation with the instead of the C. So how on earth did you come to make a Mencia?
It is the exact story of how I found the Clairette. So it was trying to buy more Chenin grapes. They didn't have more. So this was in that batch of grapes I went to taste. But because
this isn't a white grape, right?
No, yeah, but I was so surprised because they did send me a list of what was available prior to me going. And I was like, you guys don't have Mencia. Is this a typo? And they're like, yeah, no, we have some. I'm like, I gotta go check that out. Because similar as I've had a few Mencias, but it just never crossed my mind that I would run into some ever.
That someone was growing it here in the United States.
Yeah. Bingo. Like it was just like, man, this would be fun. Like every single bottle that I've had was great, and I wish I could have made it. And so I was like, man, this would be cool, but I'm not gonna give up my hopes and just never expect to make it ever. Until I get that list and I'm like, I gotta go taste it. And it was one I couldn't pass up, to where I was like, I don't care how much it is, I'll take it. So, and it worked out great because, like I said, it was, of all the grapes I did go taste that they had available, the Clairette and the Mencia were to a T, like where I wanted them, how I wanted them. Couldn't ask for more.
Nice. Similar question to what I asked you about the Clairette. With Mencia, obviously you had tasted it before, but did you have kind of a game plan going in, or were you just going to kind of stick with your laissez-faire, hands off, like I will just press this, put it into barrel, and kind of see what happens?
Yes, the laissez-faire style. Because it just like the Mourvèdre, yeah, I was like, well, it tastes good, and similar to, like I said, I've learned a lot from James, and just treat every vintage as its own. So, and I've learned too, tasting a lot of wines, going 100% stems is always kind of aggressive and can throw some like off flavors, even though the intention might not be to flavor things.
Right.
So that go-to of destemming. But as we destem, I'll taste the stems. I'm like, oh, these actually taste pretty decent. I don't know what it's gonna do, but there is probably like 2 just big bunches of stems that I threw back into this. So just like a tiny bit of stems, but still in that steel fermenter. As I mentioned, the Mourvèdre being reductive, so it got extra, but this only got 2 punch downs a day. But it lived in the steel fermenter the exact same amount of time. And then it did go into a little bit larger barrels. So I use neutral, like traditional Burgundy barrels for the Mourvèdre. Your kind of classic 59, 60 gallon barrels. But with the Mencia, Buddy James, he had some 80 gallon barrels sitting around that weren't being used. And it kind of just fit perfect for the volume I had to fit in those 2 barrels, and then have a little bit of topping wine on the side. So
nice.
Yeah, all neutral. And yeah, both the Mourvèdre and Mencia bottled the same day. So pretty close time frame wise.
Very nice. Well, I have to say, Roger says he's really enjoying the Mencia with a beef stew in a Provence style. Likes how smooth it is. I think nice acid and fruit, but not too big. Reminds me a bit of a Burgundy, which you mentioned Burgundy before. So clearly, that's coming out.
Yeah, no, this one's been fun because similar to like no prior context of like what to do and how it could work out. But I've gotten some fun feedback for others that have been in the wine biz for a long time, and a lot of people have been like, oh wow, like this is the most true to Mencia that is more traditional. And I'm like, cool, I was hoping for that as well.
I just threw it into a
Yeah.
stainless steel fermenter and let it do its thing.
Let's see what happens. But I think it's also kind of it's probably similar to what if I was to come up with a style, and as a whole, it's just letting the grapes be true. And I think that's also where we see with Europe as well. It's working with what you got at that time and place, and then just kind of sticking with it. So and for here, for me, it's almost like making new traditions with what I have, and seeing what works. And so this is kind of what I stuck with. So even there is a to tie back to earlier question. So I didn't do a 23 Mourvèdre because the 22 I made so much of.
Okay.
And then fast forward, but I did make Mencia 23. But as a typical cause and effect in winemaking, the 23 is a lot lighter.
Okay.
As I had more time to stress in my brain of what I should be doing versus showing up and being like, hey, these taste great and let's make wine out of it. I kind of nitpicked and picked it a little earlier than what this is. But as a fun thing, because I'm not against anything with wine, just as we talk about chilling it or not chilling it, I almost relate the 23 vintages. If you were to blend right now some Mourvèdre and the Mencia that you have in front of you together as a 50-50, that's kind of how the new Mencia is for the 23 vintage.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So you've added that lighter, maybe a little more of an acid component, which is interesting because this is it's a lighter bodied wine, but it has a fullness and a richness to it. And especially like on the bottom end of it, I get a lot of almost like dark chocolate and licorice notes to this. There's a lot of really dark flavors that kind of come out in this.
Yes, to a T. And because even earlier on, even in the ferment, it had a lot of these darker, like earthier smells.
Yeah.
Like almost that like kind of like dusty dirt, like just like very earthy style. Yeah, it's a trip. And like I said, it's almost made the exact same way. It's just a different grape and what the flavors come out of it. It's, yeah, totally different.
Sorry, I have a sneeze that does not want to come out. So- oh, there it is. All
There
right.
it is.
Allison, fill it. Go, Allison, go.
What I like,
Stretch it, stretch.
it's got this really smooth, silky mid palate that I think is really nice.
Yeah.
The acidity is all around. I mean, it leaves a really good kind of mouth-watering finish. So the acidity is there, but I love just the kind of rich silkiness on the palate.
Yeah, no, it's fun because even just like the European Spanish versions I've had, it's like it's that a little bit of fruity, but then a lot more of that darker note finish. Because even when similar as we're trying to explain like Clairette, I would almost like taking it to more traditional grapes, like it's almost like it's like Pinot up front and then like Petit Verdot on the finish. Like it's this light and dark combo that kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah, it's a very Sagrantino finish, like this sort of, dark, deep Italian red grape that has a lot of licorice anise notes to it. It's just so interesting. And, for those who are unfamiliar with the Mencia grape, it's grown primarily in Western Spain in the Bierzo and Ribera Sacra and Valdeorras region. It's also grown a little bit in Portugal, where it's known as Jaén. So it's definitely a warmer weather Iberian grape, but one that, it's kind of feels like you don't see a lot of it here, but I feel like there's a few little patches. I think Bokish is making one, if I'm not mistaken. But Allison can correct me on that if she needs to.
Who's doing it?
Bokish?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because they're kind of the pinnacle of Spanish varietals in the US. So but yeah, it's very cool. Do you have any idea how the Nolan Ranch decided to plant Mencia, or like how it came to be here?
It was kind of like a mixed bag, because I know they were asking a few winemakers, and just kind of like literally, bouncing ideas, because it was as a whole, it's a pretty new, like, well, we even say that California winemaking's new, or especially, but it's newer to where, within, less than 10 years old. So it's, I want to say it was just kind of one of those things of where enough people said it could work.
Yeah.
And it kind of came to fruition, because it was just like I said, it was like, wait, you have what? But this one's fun too, because it for Nolan, it's on the like far northeast hillside, and it's like a big, it's almost like a shorter rows, but it's very wide of a block.
Okay.
When you look at it, versus usually you kind of like a lot of blocks, you've seen that they tend to be long rows, but it's kind of the opposite, where they're shorter rows because they're on a hill, but it's just very expansive, because then it almost like rounds out. So you'll start to go up the hill and the Mencia starts, but then it actually crests and then it comes back down, and there's still a little bit. So it's almost like this long tape on this like northeast kind of pinnacle hill. It's pretty neat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Larry and Sandy, I don't know if it's Larry or Sandy, but they say that I have no wine words other than I like it. So that's a nice compliment. And Patty and David want to know, how does this wine differ from what you have tasted in Europe? You mentioned you have tasted some Mencias before. Like, what do you find the California version has that the Spanish version doesn't have, and vice versa?
It's very similar to like well, not to like dumb it down, but like the sunshine. You almost taste like a little bit of a little more like fruit depth for a lot of, like, at least for this wine.
Yeah.
Versus the European, there's like, because it seems to be more of like a table wine for Spanish versions. Like it's
Right.
They never really take it super serious.
Yeah.
It is more of the like old school of like, if you had a barrel of wine where you just fill up a carafe like every day, there's a good chance it's Mencia.
Yeah, it feels like the western and southern, kind of the warmer portions of Spain. That's how a lot of the grapes are, the wines are considered, where it's, the north and the east where it's considered a little more uh intense, a little more complex.
Yes. Yeah, and so I would give like the more Spanish ones, there's I joke and I kind of call it the cellar funk. Like there's always kind of this kind of like cellar like kind of edge to it, just like old school, like there's not an extreme amount of cleanliness, but
Right.
it's still tasty and drinkable. But it also kind of reminds me of like when you get the like real basic Côte d'Arones.
Mhm.
It's that sense of like you could pick it out, but also it's not very like distinctive
Yeah.
and yeah, a little more rustic.
Yeah, some of the Vinditab from those regions where, there's one variant or maybe one varietal is slightly out of whack, so it doesn't get the Côte d'Aron or whatever variant it is, but you know what it is, it's just a little more intense, a little richer.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so we get lucky, as I'd like to say that we have sunshine to play in our favor, so we get just like a little bit more fruit intensity
Yeah.
on flavors to where it's a little more exciting, it's a little more playful, and it's not as rustic to where you need to chase it with something else or that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Roger says if the goal is food friendly and flexible red, then this Mencia nails it. So well done there. Food pairings with this, what would you put with something like this?
I to throw back as I mentioned before, but like to take the extreme of like say we start with the claret and some greens on the grill. Tri-tip is kind
Yeah.
of the go-to red meats wise. Um, oh man,
It works with pizza.
it,
Yes.
I'm
Allison can vouch
hoping
for the pizza pairing.
yes. The if anything, you could say my goal as a for style it's every wine's a pizza wine. I'm hoping that every wine you can pair with a different type of pizza.
Yeah.
What does the label tell you food wise?
Oh, so well, because as I've progressed, as we were talking about labels earlier, the Chenin was the first one, and that was kind of the most magazine-like I went with. The Mourvèdre, as I kind of touched on, it's like just it was kind of fun just playing with the layers and like I wanted more, so like adding more and more to the label. And then the Clairette went into the weeds of details, but similar with the Mencia, it was kind of this ode to that Spanish heritage.
Mhm.
More so in the sense of Santa Barbara County and the Spanish vaqueros, as an ode to even the origin of the Zorro story came from this area. So it was kind of fun. I was like, oh, if I'm working with a Spanish grape and we're known for the Spanish, coming to our area and then alluding to like because there's still the fiesta down in Santa Barbara, and actually my uncle-in-law was one of the El Presidentes of the Vaquero, so it was kind of
Oh,
fun,
nice.
like kind of this like unraveling ode to the Spanish grape and heritage of the county. So I went with it's the only one that doesn't have color, being that it was other than all the design elements, uh, cowboy themed, but
Mhm.
also it was meant to look like a wanted poster,
Okay.
and or a branding. So it's kind of this double entendre of like there's no color, it's just black, like psh, like put on there, and then all the fonts, all that kind of rustic, hopeful cowboy theme.
Yeah, it definitely has that kind of old Western, definitely old fashioned feel with the rope braiding on it and whatnot.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm glad you say the rope blading because that was actually the hardest thing to make.
Yeah, that's quite a design. I mean, that's
Yeah.
not a clip art I imagine you can find.
No, I was hoping it was clip art, but not that easy. Yeah, so I had to learn how to make that and then intertwine it in there the way I wanted.
So here's my really like interesting but funky food pairing with this. Santa Maria Grill, but throw whole bulbs of fennel on there
Ooh,
and let it char down and wilt, and then chop it up, put it on a plate, olive oil, and a little bit of red wine vinegar over top of it. But I think that like that anise note from the fennel with the
yeah.
anise that I'm getting out of this, and then the red wine vinegar, a lighter red wine vinegar to like bring some acid. Like I think I can just taste that with the char and everything. I think it'd be delicious.
Yes. Oh yeah, I agree. No, like I said, that's my go-to of the less is more. It's like almost everything ends up on that grill with just like a tiny bit of seasoning and just, but yeah, that the char flavors and the smoke, but also yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that fennel will be awesome.
But hopefully some seasoning, because it's the one thing when Teresa makes dinner, I always have to tell her to add salt. She refuses to add salt to anything, and you definitely need a little bit of salt there.
Yes.
Beautiful. As we're wrapping up, let's talk a little bit about like what you have coming up with 23, 24. Where do you want to go? Are there any, things you have in barrel that you're excited about? Are there any grapes you're looking forward to working with? What's going to happen to RZN Wines over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Oh yeah, good question because it as
It
we
changes every day.
yes, no, it's kind of this fun thing. Well, similar to where we talked about on the white side. I love how the whites and reds became a good contrast in the sense of like both whites are very different, both reds are very different. And I try to keep that going through 23. 24, this last vintage though, I kind of cut back because wine industry's kind of crazy right now.
Yeah,
But
and it was a tough year. I mean, with the late frosts, a lot of low yields and people dropping fruit.
bingo. And so for myself, I kind of put the brakes on, but also because I did have through James, and we were always hunting for different vineyards, and we found a new vineyard for us, but it's been around for a while. Actually, in Arroyo Grande of all places, and they have a lot of neat stuff. So there's some vineyards up there that's kind of like I want to save for of sorts and
Sure.
kind of see what can happen there because they have some kind of like classic stuff, but then there's some like dry farm head train vines up there. They have
Interesting.
like tucked up away that were stuff that I was like, oh, so who knows? Maybe in like 2 or 3 years, you might see a RZN Kunwa.
Oh,
Ooh.
interesting.
We'll see, because that was even James was like, why don't you buy that already? And so yeah, we'll see. But for the most part, kind of the lineup you see is kind of what I'm gonna, try and keep with for a little while. And then yeah, probably more the 25, 26, 27 future vintages might be a little change up. But as we've been talking about labels and stuff, it'll be obvious. Oh, but a fun one that I did already bottle, and I've kept it as more of like personal home drinking wine.
Mhm.
I have one right here. I did make a wine. It's on the website, but it's called the Party Potion.
Oh,
So it is literally all the wines I've made put into one.
okay.
Yeah. So even label wise, I'm not sure if it'll blur it or not, but it's
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a
I see
mix.
the blocks, but
Oh,
then
you literally blended all
Yeah,
the.
it is all the labels put together.
so Mencia, Mourvèdre, Clairette Blanche, Chenin Blanc, all together in one.
Bingo.
How's
Yeah.
the wine?
Is it just like brown? Like what's the color on it?
If anything, it looks most like them in.
I think of like when you add, you know, all the paints together and then mix them together, they just end up being brown.
Yeah,
Chris,
no,
Chris,
well,
you take a red wine and a white wine, you make a lighter red wine. Why is it suddenly brown?
I'm going with
It's-
what I know.
it's the orange, the blues, the greens,
Yeah.
all those different
Right.
colors. So yeah, it's well, it's in the back of my head. I know I'm gonna say it out loud, and it's gonna probably bite me in the foot. But I never wanted to make rosé. But so it's like the closest thing I will probably make to rosé, but it's not rosé. It's
It's a party
it's a
potion.
little lighter than the Mourvèdre.
Got it.
Yeah, but it's the epitome of if you wanted to save the Mourvèdre and not chill it too much, that's the one you just chill it and crush it. You don't think about it. It's super fun. Yeah, but that's yeah.
Was that a one-time only, or is that the party potion something you're thinking about, you know, in the future?
I think I'll probably keep running with it. But it's like super small. Like that
You
one.
blended at the very end with what didn't fit into like a barrel.
That's how it started. Like it was literally the leftovers, and I didn't have anywhere to put them. And so I was like, well, it's still good. I'm just gonna throw them together and drink them at home. And I would take them to pouring events or like any sort of event. I was like, I'll just throw one in the bag, and if people want to try it, like, especially it was more so like the winemaker buddies. They're like,
Right.
what else you got? Like,
Yeah. What's under the table?
yeah, what's under the table? But then this was the first vintage that I just like, well, let's actually pull a little bit. So this is technically 23 vintage of Chenin, Clairette, everything. So it's
But you blend the finished product of each wine and then let them join together and
Are you measuring them out, or is it literally again just hands off, whatever's left, I'm throwing it in the bin and there we go?
a little bit of both. So I pull everything. So out of barrel is the Chenin. Yeah, each varietal, I'll pull the final blends, which is literally it's pulling just everything. And since I have them usually all about the same time in tanks, I take those leftovers that aren't going into it, which is usually the lees or the like little bit of bottom stuff.
Yeah.
And then like with this, I just happen to have I don't know if you saw, but it's technically a Riesling Hock bottle.
I noticed that, and it's also a darker green bottle than your kind of
Yes.
the yellowish ones that you use.
Correct.
The leaf bottles, yeah.
And so it ended up being like it was just like a buddy had some extra. I was like, I'll take those off your hands. So
I'll give you a nickel
was,
for each of those bottles.
yeah, and a nickel case. And so I ended up just pulling enough wine off of everything of finished stuff from those tanks to make enough to fit I think I did 15 cases. So
Okay.
it's literally nothing. I don't really have much plans for it, but well, considering there's a label now, I might, who knows?
It's true.
We'll see how
What's the response been for those that you've tasted on it?
They love it. It's a fruity chilled red, like as we were talking about that chilled red version. So it's light, it's tasty. It doesn't have it's not as strong like acid wise, it's not as strong tannin wise when you go to the either scales.
Right.
So it all kind of melds together. So like the whites have more bite, the reds have a little more grip. So this kind of mellows both of them together since they are everything together. But still very tasty. So it's fun. Like I said, it was my like house wine until I put a label on it. Now I'm not supposed to drink it. I should be selling it.
Now you've got to make some money off of it. I guess sell it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just a fun one. I just made a few and see what happens.
Nice. Very cool.
But for the most part, there's always new stuff on the radar, as a whole. And we'll kind of see where it goes. But for sure, staples, the Chenin, that's my one I want to just move forward mostly with.
Yeah.
Mourvèdre probably second, and then yeah, we'll kind of see how the Clairette and Mencia, if I can keep them happy and
Mhm.
see what goes.
Absolutely. Awesome. So the most important question of the night, if folks are in the Lompoc area and want to meet you in person, want to do a tasting, want to buy wine from you, maybe even if they're not from the Lompoc area, what is
Yeah.
the best way for them to do all of that?
Any way that they can look us up. So it's website rznwines.com. Super simple. All social media. I try and have an account for everything just in case. So, and it's the same thing, RZN Wines, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Snap, whatever you want to, whatever you want to be
Your
on.
pager, ICQ, AIM.
Yeah. Which is similar to where I try and have fun with the like social media in the routes of there's a lot of just different stuff I think is fun. Skateboarding, food, little cool shops.
It's
Whatever
a true extension of yourself.
Exactly. And that's what it's how do I tell the story without doing a Zoom every night?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which,
Just once in a while for special people.
right.
Yeah.
We appreciate that. We appreciate
yeah.
we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to do a Zoom with us.
Yeah, no, one as well too. I almost forgot, but even email, which I have it on the website. Nate at rznwines.com. And as I mentioned, my great friends and colleagues, because I make all these wines at Liquid Farm Winery, but I do tastings there as well. So tastings all just by appointment, not a problem. We have a little tasting space, or as I call it, fancy break room, during the day. But yeah, no, it's happy to taste. And even if I'm in the area, wherever people are, I even try and do tastings outside of here. So other than events and stuff, like I had a buddy, he used to call them road shows. So it's if someone wants to have a tasting at their house,
yeah, you'll show up.
And,
yeah,
and it's possible you'll see him. Possible you'll see him in March at the Festival of Forgotten Grapes.
Yes.
Yeah. Bug Chris and Allison. Tell them we want to see RZN Wines, and
send your letters and pressure emails to Nate at reasonwines.com as to how you want to see him at the Festival of
Forgotten Grapes love letters. How about that? Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I have one request. So on the next vintage of wines, the 23s or the 24s, whatever the next label is, on the back label, underneath minimal intervention, before your little quote, I think you have to put in quotes, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Yeah.
That's clearly a good catchphrase for you. And I think that needs to be on your labels from now on.
Oh yeah. Yes. No, and that's a fun thing. Well, as on the website too, I always put like the like PDF images of all the labels. So if you go on for like that party one, it was going to be too many words, but I called it super minimal intervention. And I always wonder if I'll get flagged from because obviously we have to get these all labels usually have to be approved by the TTB government wines.
Yeah, but it's just the back labels, the front labels where the alcohol label.
Just have to say it's your skateboarder talk. It's like super minimal, dude.
No, yeah, because that's what. Well, I wanted to put hyper minimal, like just.
It's up there with like Vintner's Reserve and those words that basically mean nothing that you can put on the label.
That was exactly why the word special edition is on the Chenin. I was like, what silly word can I come up with? But I want to change from reserve to something else. So yeah, but it kind of tied in with the magazine theme too. It's like, oh, this is the special edition, blah blah blah. Yeah.
Oh, you know, there's some sucker out there who thought they got a special bottle.
Just that one. The one you grabbed is the special one. No others like it.
I got a golden ticket.
Yeah.
I got a golden ticket. Yes.
Bingo. That's it.
Beautiful.
Nate, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just wanted to tell you, the wines were lovely. They went great with the food, but the
I
thing.
guess we're going to start the Q&A portion now. Hey, Nate, can you stick around and do a little Q&A with
This
some
is
of our
not a
people?
question. This is not a question. The thing that struck me the most is 12% alcohol. I am constantly looking for a wine that's under 14%, and I can never find one. They just tire your palate out. These are so refreshing in both senses of the word, and I think it's great that you're doing that.
Thank you. Yeah. To not answer your question, that's not a question.
Are you
it's
joining
very-
us for the Q&A? Because at this
Yeah.
point, we've already started. So
Yeah, there you go.
we appreciate it.
But that's so the fun part is, and I give a lot of credit to James Sparks for King's Carry. He's very adamant about tasting the grapes. It's being proactive, and hence the very unactive winemaking that I try to do. It's
So hyper minimal.
hyper.
Then let's see what happens.
Yes, and it falls into the realm of it's going to the vineyard, checking on the grapes a lot, and making sure that they taste where they want to taste, versus, the numbers will tell you one thing, but it's when you taste it. And it's been fun, and in my like winery progression or making wine progression it's just those aha moments of like, this tastes good, we should pick it. And it's similar, like I said, with color. Alcohol is not on my radar, but it just happens to be lower because I like that vulnerability of freshness to tie in with the tannins or the fruit or the all the different kind of layers of the wines.
Well, it's probably a combination of the grape variety when you pick it. But even with like the Mencia, you get a richer wine. It doesn't have to be richness from alcohol. It's just richness from the fruit and the texture.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Also, I feel like you could get away with creating a series of skate decks called Hyper Minimal. I think that would be huge. And also little like 6-ounce cans of wine. Like if you can your Chenin Blanc and call it Hyper Minimal, I think you've got a good like 20-something crossover brand there.
Yes. No, and that's we joked when you picked up the wine press was in the sense of like even packaging, like I try to be minimal, more sustainable, lighter glass. But that's actually been on my radar is to one day we'll see about cans or something different.
Little Capri Sun foil bags or little cardboard boxes, like juice boxes.
Yes, the juice box. Yeah, no, my kid rips through those juice box and milk boxes like crazy. So it's
there you go.
What
else can you hold while you're skating and drinking at the same time?
Oh yeah, no, exactly. No, and that's one of those other fun things of like, other than like packaging is similar as I make like a bunch of stickers. So that's like a fun thing outside of like, because that's also where I think of the labels. I was like, man, sometimes we have extra labels. Like, why can't we use those? So they're dubbed as stickers after they don't go on bottles. So
you'll see them all over stop signs, all over the Lompoc area.
Which I don't know who did that, but
right.
Whoever did, they shouldn't do that. It's not legal. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions for Nate out there? This is your time to unmute yourself and question or comment. Patty.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. How do you worry about wine recognition from vintage to vintage? Like if somebody were to be a wine club member and they fall in love with the Mourvèdre this year, this bottle, but 2 years from now, they get really excited and they plan a whole dinner around it, and it doesn't taste the same.
I worry about it 50-50. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm always gonna be like, oh yeah, the very Switzerland, meet in the middle. But as a whole, this is kind of like something I've like been learning, especially on the winemaking side, is that it does take multiple vintages to kind of figure out where things kind of land. Especially in the winemaking of like, as we talk about style and for myself, but even in general, because to a T is what you'll see this vintage that you're tasting, the Clairette and the Mencia are going to be pretty different. So like for the 23 Clairette, it's a lot lighter, and same with the Mencia is a lot lighter. Because I kind of got in my head of thinking, overthinking, like, oh, is this like, do I wait until that previous vintage, which was kind of just like fell in my lap, but then now being more proactive, as I mentioned, like going a lot, tasting it. But for those vintages, when those grapes taste good, I was like, these taste good, let's pick them. So it's an allude to even at the very beginning, every vintage is on the bottle for a reason. And it's, to me, the antithesis of, what makes wine fun and interesting and awesome is that every year it is going to be a little different. We're going to have a similar through line for, as we've talked about, for Chris and our sake of like trying to dissect like the Mencia. We've had a few, there's these similarities, but it's still, it's going to be California, Santa Barbara County, Mencia, not very many, but it's just a little different than what you'll find from the classic Spaniard style. But I don't know. I think that's what the fun part is, because, big picture through line, I'm trying to make, more fun, fresh, interesting wine. So they're always going to be that kind of wheelhouse as a whole. But there's going to be the ebbs and flows of, might have a lighter year, might have a bigger year, mostly being vintage, Mother Nature. Because even, 23, we had a longer hang time, as I mentioned, with the Chenin. So it got a little richer, a little more kind of depth to it, versus if you guys happen to ever run into some 22s, a little lighter, a little fresher, had a shorter barrel time.
And
so
you still have some of that left. It's just very, very limited, right?
Yes. Yeah. I want to say there's probably like 6 or 8 cases. Maybe.
But to your point, Nate, and I think Patty, that's the thing is whenever you buy wine from smaller producers or any producer that is terroir driven and vintage driven, you will, as long as winemakers are not manipulating the wine is going to reflect the vintage. So if it's a hot vintage, it's going to be a very different wine than a cold vintage. Obviously, if they're changing how they make the wine by adding more oak or less oak, that will change one part of it. Longer aging, lees stirring, any of those things, but that's an evolution in a winemaker. Then once they find how they like it, they'll probably keep doing that. Yeah. But vintage variation is just, you want that. I mean, it's true that if you like a wine today and you decide, but even if you like this wine today and bought a bottle and you held on to it for 3 years before you open it up, it might be a different wine when you open it up. So, that's why we read wine notes to see, like, is it giving what I want? And maybe you have an extra bottle that you open first and try it before you risk it on everyone else.
Yeah. Yes. No, well, and actually a great kind of tie-in too is just like we talked about, just like the Chenin. for me personally, if I stylistically change something, I'll probably tag it as a different bottle.
Oh, interesting.
Just like the special edition versus a 0.0. So for me personally, like if I'm gonna physically do something different to it, I'll probably designate it. It might be minimal like that, but it's usually it's gonna be probably like you said, the Mourvèdre. If I get the Mourvèdre though from a different vineyard, we'll see. I might make a new label for it just because it's a different Mourvèdre from somewhere else.
It'll be the even more issue.
Yeah, even more issue. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It'll be the hyper version.
And most importantly, Patty, remember that the minute that your card or check clears and the bottle is handed over to you, whatever changes happen in the bottle is your fault.
Yes.
It's not the winemaker's fault. It was your storage, how you opened it. It was all your fault.
Wow. Spoken like not a winemaker.
Spoken like a capitalist.
Yeah, once it leaves the winery, it's
We're
Yeah.
done.
yeah.
You take full
That's your
control
problem.
of said bottle. Yes.
Can't be my faulty cork or my dirty winery. It's all you.
Nope. It's storage. It's how you stored it. It's your fault. Don't put it in the direct sunlight in your kitchen in that weird little wine rack next to your microwave. And you all have it. We know.
Bingo. Yeah. Talking of safety too, you'll probably have seen I use all DM corks. Just as I've been in the industry now, it's my 10-year anniversary in the wine biz. These things have been like bulletproof. So it's super awesome that even to add on to my sustainable clause, these are the more sustainable versions that DM makes, being the ground up cork, but they use more sustainable materials. Even the coating on the corks is actually like a beeswax
Wow.
base.
And I want to ask you about that because,
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's a movement to move to Stelvin and given your wines and the price points and how, your wines are really intended to be drunk young, I suspect. These are wines that you can age, but I mean, even through the Mencia, I think they're basically meant to be drunk within a year or two. So have you considered, moving to Stelvin?
It's similar to, like I mentioned, different packaging. It sounds very alluding, but it's like I'm open to anything.
Right.
But for
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, see what happens. This has just been the kind of go-to, which I think is what I think is like it's been for us winemakers. We always want to keep things as safe as possible. Other than me just letting things go for the most part, but if I can trap it in a finished product the best I can, these DM corks have been super awesome. They've worked really well. And because even as I mentioned, previous jobs with natural corks, they work great. But I remember that one of the tasting rooms, every week there was some bottle that was off.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I started working with different brands that use the DM corks, I literally don't check the wines. And every wine's been awesome. And so it was kind of a no-brainer. It's like the safe cork, but also this sustainable route ended up being like, it's finally gotten to a point where more people are wanting them to where it is more affordable. Because that's actually, I got James Sparks on them because I was just going to do it because it's what my ethos was of more sustainable. I was like, I'm just going to get them just cause. And then he's like, well, how much are they? I'm like, oh, they're only like a little bit more. Cause I think like, I don't buy a lot, but I want to say rough numbers. They're like high, low 30 cents, 40 cents for like a normal cork for regular DMs. And then these are like mid high 40 cents.
Okay, so you're like, yeah, like an extra 10 cents a bottle.
Exactly. And for me, it's worth it for what I'm
Yeah.
wanting to do.
Doesn't affect your margin that much.
Yeah, not too much. It's not too bad. Or there's hence the very hands-off winemaking. I don't have there's not a lot of expenses there, so I put it other places. Yeah.
So Stacy, Matt, and Rigo had to sign off, but they wanted you to know that you were fascinating and your wines were very tasty.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right. Any other questions for Nate before we let him get back to Rochelle and your son?
Zane.
Zane. Yeah.
Zane. I know. I couldn't remember if it was Zach or Zane. Zane.
I just have to say, all 4 wines did not need food. They were very sippable just by themselves. And that I appreciate a great deal.
Yes. I touched on it slightly earlier, but that's exactly was my hope is to, similar as we mentioned, the lower alcohol. It's fermented grape juice that's just super yummy. And the unofficial tagline that I don't have anywhere printed, but I like to say it is, don't think, just drink. It's
Nice.
I just try, and what we said is
We need t-shirts that say that.
it might be in the works.
And then on the back, let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. Yeah, no, it's one of those.
That's not a good combination, Chris.
I think it is. I actually think that's a great
girl
marketing
wearing it
combo
on the
right
street.
Yeah, it's not a good look on everyone.
Miss Responsible Allison, I think you'll sell 1 million of those shirts with
What about being
don't think,
responsible?
let's drink and let's see
I
what
don't know
happens.
any woman who says, don't think, just drink and see what happens.
I don't have a problem. Yeah, no, no, it goes back to that kind of the skateboard marketing. I have millions of taglines that pop in my head, but it's it's just super fun. Any wine I make, I'm just hoping it's tasty, enjoyable either way, with the 3 big F's: food, family, friends. It's whatever it may be, I just hope it's good.
So have a little RZN with the FFF.
Yes. Bingo.
Make sure you're not MIA at the PTA.
Yeah, just remember, not too many F's. You don't want to be too.
No, 4 F's is what got you kicked out of the army.
Yeah. Don't want to be too
We're lucky.
as they would say.
If you're lucky, yes, exactly. Or that or bone spurs, but we won't talk about that. Anyway, Nate, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for being here again. RZN Wines with an S.com is where you can go to buy wines online. Click on the email, contact Nate directly, find out more, everything you need to know. Again, next month, last one of the 2024 is Omega Road Wines. Really, really fun winery that Allison has brought to us. Our first Livermore winery. So keep an eye out for that offer in the next couple of weeks. And other than that, I think we are all good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you,
guys.
Nate.